Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about stuff that I'd like to change in Diablo 4. Now, I know there's already hundreds of videos out there like this, and I'm not under any illusion that the devs are going to watch this and I'm going to implement everything like this. Think about it as more of a therapeutic session where maybe you can see a thing or two that you would agree with. We'll just spew it out into the void, and I'm sure it's going to happen down the line, wink wink. But before we go into my biggest problems with the game, I want to recap a little bit of the dev talk that happened just a day ago, where they basically went over a lot of things already that were kind of annoying me. First up, talking about endgame dungeons like nightmare dungeons and how they were annoying. You would have to go there with your horse every single time when you opened a sigil. They acknowledged and they are aware that it is very annoying to do renown again and again and again every season, and they're trying to take measures. They talked about resistances being bad, although I got the impression that they don't exactly know just how bad they are in endgame. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in this video. And they also talked about stuff like unfair hardcore devs, bugs that they want to fix, but everything else we're basically going to talk about in this video. With the first point for me, which is there's just not enough enemy monsters. Now, they have addressed this quite a bit over the last few hot fixes where they nerfed the best dungeons. Then they took a little bit of a more drastic approach and they kind of normalized all dungeons across the board. And what that meant is there's just less enemies now. That is kind of a problem. And I'm not talking about XP. I want to make this clear. I don't need like a free level 100. I don't have a problem grinding for level 100. I think those kind of issues are not really there, because if it's really hard to get to level 100, that also means it's worth more getting there, right? So everybody is maybe not going to be on 100. They're going to be on 95 at least. It's just a goalpost switches, right? That's not my problem. My problem is it's just less fun if dungeons have less monsters to kill. That is what we're here for. We want monsters to explode. We want a Sork to blow up a whole pack for Frost Nova, right? That is what's fun about the game, and that is kind of missing right now. There's very often these encounters where there's just like 3 mobs standing there. Then you go further, there's another 3 mobs, and you really have to wait for that one elite pack that is actually surrounded by enemies. And I understand this could have to do with performance issues, but that is hopefully something that they can work out. This would also really improve the cooldown meta. When I talk about cooldown meta is, for example, if I play my Sork, right, what happens a lot is there's like, let's say 3 to 4 monsters. And the problem is, am I going to spam all my cooldowns on that one pack if there's going to be another one down the line? Then I don't have my cooldowns up, stuff like that. It feels very awkward to kind of waste your cooldowns on like no mobs. I'm sure other classes feel like that as well, but this is overall my biggest complaint. Just, I don't know, nerf XP per monster, give us more monsters for the game feel. The second thing I want to talk about is the open world. And while the open world is a lot better than I anticipated it to be, there's still much to be desired. Once you get into endgame, a lot of these things will kind of feel like busy work, other than Helltides. I think Helltides are in the perfect spot right now. They're really fun. They have their own unique currency that you need to grind for. And that is something I would wish for a lot of the other events as well. For example, for the Tree of Whispers and Legions. Now, there's basically no reason to do Tree of Whispers. The only time I actually hand in caches at the Tree of Whispers is whenever I randomly kill a dungeon boss and it just gives me Grim Favor for no reason because I didn't even look at it, right? So that's cool, I guess, but just farming them seems very underwhelming, especially compared to basically every other endgame grind. Same is true for Legions. I really like the idea of Legions as sort of like this gather point for a lot of different players that then slay monsters together, but it's just not rewarding enough for the time investment, so I'd really like to get that fixed. And a lot of these things can be fixed with, for example, just say, for example, Forgotten Souls, right? In Helltides are the only way to get Forgotten Souls. Well, you can do the same thing for other events, so you can more target farm specific mats. Another thing I'd like more of is stuff like Butcher or Treasure Goblins. A problem right now I have with Treasure Goblins is that they don't really drop that much, so I would like them to make them super rare. For example, a cool idea would be make them super rare, so whenever you find them, you're like, oh my god, I need to get this one, but make them drop one unique every single time. Just make them super rare and an extremely hype encounter. The same I would wish for the Butcher, and you could introduce more mini-bosses like that into the world. Or, alternatively, you could make it so that in just normal areas, they have more chance to just be there, or in like stuff like strongholds. So you can incentivize going out there into the open world instead of just doing dungeons repeatedly. Then, for example, world bosses. The big payoff that everyone was talking about was Scattered Prisms, which is the currency that gives you sockets. It just drops normally anyways. You don't need to do world bosses. World bosses aren't even that rewarding. Cool, first time you'll get a cache. The cache is not even that big of a deal. A single endgame Helltide chest gives you more legendaries than that, so why would I ever go out of my way to do them? make them drop something unique, something that's really cool. I'm not talking just about uniques, like a certain mat that you need for a certain thing that you can't get anywhere else. So people are actually like waiting for the world bosses. Now, what I would like at endgame as well is if obos could actually give you uniques. Now, this is more of an endgame problem, so maybe a lot of you guys cannot relate with that. I understand that. But basically, from events, you get obos, and I don't know, you can get stuff like uniques, you can get decent rares, they can have good item power, that's all cool. But endgame, what will happen here is it's kinda useless, and it just makes events kinda worse, because what you're mostly looking for is uniques, or uniques with better rolls, because all your legendary powers will already be done. Like, legendaries drop quite a bit. If you're at level 97, there's a good chance most of your legendary aspects will be maxed out. So you're really just looking for that one unique that you need to make your build insane, or to respec into the better version of your build, or like a really good rare that you can put another aspect on. And it would just be kind of hype. For example, I had to farm for this Tempest Roar so goddamn long. And it would have just kind of been cool to just go here and be able to click on cap and have like a tiny chance to maybe even get it. Just something that makes me feel like I can deterministically get it. But what these points all just point towards is make the open world more than just a Helltide farm or like a busy work to get to your dungeons. Make it more creative, more interesting. I would love to engage with it more. Now, the next one is a little bit more specific, and that has to do with item stat balance. Not every item stat is made equally, and that's a normal thing across all ERPGs. Basically, PoE has this to an endless extent, but there's some outliers here. The first one being vulnerable damage. It is just better than anything else. If you look at this ring right here, if this ring did not have vulnerable damage and anything else, it would be complete useless. And that is how it is for a lot of items, for example, as well weapons. But I'll make this more clear. On every single class as of this recording, if you don't have vuln damage, and it could have vuln damage, you don't have optimal gear. And that is because vulnerable is its own multiplier. So all the increases to damage all add up to one multiplier, whereas vulnerable is a different multiplier. So all these increases to close enemies, distant enemies, whatever, they all get added up, and they get added up to like 800, 900. But then that gets multiplied by the vuln damage. That is why it is so strong. And there's a certain problem here in terms of class balance. The biggest being that some classes get more weapons, for example, Barb or Rogue, where they can actually get stats on, right? So that means they get more legendary aspects, but it also means they get more vuln damage. Rogue also just gets more vuln damage in general. So another thing is Sork has a really bad time with vulnerability uptime. So whereas other classes will just have 100% uptime on it, some others just have to struggle for it. So there's really two ways to balance this. The first would be to just say, okay, that's just a class trait. Rogue is good because of that, and we have to tone everything else down. Or you kind of have to normalize it and not make it an OP stat. But this feeds into our second problem, which is not only is vuln damage kind of insane, increased damage sucks. And that is mostly because you get so much from the Paragon boards. You will kind of notice this around about level 70, level 80. For example, stuff like damage to close enemies right here, 33%, might feel good early, but later it is like maybe, I don't know, 3-4% more damage for a whole stat on your item. And that's mainly because it's all additive with each other, right? At the start, you're like, oh, 20% increased damage. That's awesome. But it's not a multiplier, right? Over time, you will get so much of these increases to damage. Also because a lot of the glyphs will give you increased damage as well. So for example, maybe I can find it right here. I think the werewolf one right here. Damage while in werewolf form, right? And I'm going to scale this up to like 100% damage. All these small nodes on the way. In total, I'm probably going to have 600, 700% increased damage. And then this 33% here from my item is going to be added on top from, for example, 600 to 633. It's just not very efficient. So either you have to give more increased damage, rebalance the Paragon board and how it works, maybe make it a separate multiplier from your gear. Anyway, there has to be some kind of change here, because right now increased damage is very, very bad. And this is not even the worst example. There's like body armor mods that give like 10% increased damage. It's kind of wild. And then at the end, we have resistances suck in endgame. And they said they're going to address this in season 2 because it takes them a little bit longer to address. I get that, but I still want to put it here. Kripparrian made a really good video about it if you want to know more on this. If you're early into the game, you're like level 40, 50, you're finishing your first capstone dungeons, something like a res pod can still make quite a bit of a difference. For example, if you're doing the second capstone, a fire resistance potion will do quite a bit. But once you get into endgame, it's just really annoying. And I'm saying this because they want resistance to matter. They put it as an implicit on every single ring. and every single amulet. And as well as that, there's even a stat, right? Intelligence gives you all resistances. So there's quite a bit of class balance issues as well when one of your stats is just so much worse than all the other ones. Plus, it makes finding decent to good items just a lot harder. If I see poison resistance here, I can already like close my eyes and go to the next item. I already know it's going to be trash. And then we have stash tab space. Now, I acknowledge that I'm a hoarder, but here's the thing. There's a lot of legendary aspects in this game that could potentially be build defining. And if you know you're probably going to play more than one build, you want to hoard them, because if you just salvage them all and then you start from scratch and now you have to find that one again, maybe you had a perfect roll, you don't just want to throw that away, you want to stash it. And with currently 4 stash tabs, it is just completely impossible. Same as that, right? Stuff like sigils have to also be in this stash because they get full very, very quickly. And maybe you want to save up certain layouts for certain builds. Or God forbid, you're playing more than one class. I had to scrap all my Sork uniques and legendaries that I maybe wanted to use later just to make room for the druid. It is just quite annoying. And there's, I mean, it's not a space issue, right? Like there's so much space below down here where you could fit in more items. You could also just make it so you can buy more. In general, I know why they're doing it, right? They just want to sell you these later for real money, which is a pretty tough pill to swallow for a $70 game, right? So that is just kind of rough. Please, more stash tabs. And then also the search and filter function is completely missing here. If I need a certain aspect and I know I have it in my stash, I now have to look through hundreds of items. And sure, you could say just organize it better, but how am I going to organize it if I don't even have any space to organize it with, right? There's only 4 and I'm completely full right now. If I could just get more, if I had 10 stash tabs, I could organize these really well. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just an outlier here. You can tell me that in the comments. Maybe I'm just being silly here. But this game really needs way, way, way more stash tabs, in my opinion. Now, another thing I want to talk about is the horse. So right now, I'm just walking, and this is with 40% increased movement speed. Now, if I go on my horsey right here, you will see that we're basically the same speed, right? This is obviously only in town where you cannot accelerate, but walking also doesn't make it so you are kind of getting stuck at certain points, right? Just in endgame, walking just feels 100 times better. And I get it. If you just started out the game, you're going to be like, no, horse is a godsend. When I completed Act 3 and I got the horse, that's a game changer because now I can travel through the world. And that is true, but what you will notice is once you get to like 200% movement speed, you get to movement speed cap, which is going to happen on almost every build, at least if you build for it, which you probably should just for quality of life. You'll actually be faster just going around like that. So there is a certain issue where into endgame, your whole horse is just kind of bad. And that leaves a lot to be desired. If we're talking about endgame and having more stuff to do on the open world map, then you would also think that you would get faster, which you really don't. It's just that the movement speed catches up to the speed of your horse and it just gets useless. The horse also gets stuck quite frequently, as I already talked about it. Now, maybe there's going to be something like itemization for horses, which could fix this down the line. Like, for example, a small inventory, like for your companions, for example, in Diablo 3, right? Where you can kind of adjust what you want. Do you want speed? Do you want more knockdown protection? For example, when enemies hit it, that you have more defense against getting knocked down. There's also this weird thing where if you go down from your horse, in the open world, there's actually a cooldown that triggers, so you have to wait until you can get back on it again. They could maybe remove that cooldown, or with itemization, make it so you can spec into reducing that cooldown. In general, I think that's something they have already planned out, right? Maybe that's an expansion or something like that. I really hope they don't plan to put this in the cash shop. Then we get to number 6, which is the speed balance in this game. And oh boy, that is a big, big problem, especially for necromancers, but also for people who haven't really spec'd into movement speed at the moment. So the ways to get movement speed right now is boots and amulet. Other than that, you basically have to rely on whatever the class gives you, which means that classes like Necro are kind of screwed, while all other classes, like for example, the Druid, is shoehorned into certain legendary aspects and certain ways and playstyles. For example, the werewolf right here, where you go Grizzly Rage and then you transform into a werewolf instead of a bear, because you also can get this 38% movement speed. As well as that, on the passive tree, you also get 9% movement speed for being a werewolf. So what you kind of end up with is the game asking you, do you want to be fast or do you want to play anything else? On Necro, you don't even have that option, and on other classes, it basically destroys certain design space. Now, the only really solution I can find for this is make evade a little bit more relevant. If you don't know, evade is basically this cooldown, like a 4-second cooldown. You can make this very short evade maneuver, which is kind of useless. It is not really a movement skill, right? But what you can do is on your boots, you can get an implicit with evade grants up to 75% movement speed for a second. And while that does help, it's definitely not the end all be all. I would just like to see a little bit more evade customization and then take that a little bit away from classes. Maybe from everything but rogue, because speed, I guess, is kind of like rogue's power fantasy. But the problem is you kind of have to make a decision here. Do you want to play into the power fantasy, or do you actually want to make this game multiplayer friendly? Because currently, if you have a necro in a group, or a bear version of a druid in a group, all they do is basically track around everybody else and just pick up loot, and you can't really even have any impact on combat. So understand this is a very, very thin line to tread, but I think something has to be done about it. Now, the last thing here is minions just kind of suck. Now, you might be confused why I would put this into such a general video, right? This is a very, very niche thing, you might think, but of all the niche things that are not playable, minions are just so far removed from being playable that they just need a mention right here. They had a patch recently where they buffed minions by actually quite a bit, but I don't think they understand on just what level minions need help. I'm talking ×5 to ×10 the damage, and then also AI changes so you can actually like maneuver them better, or they don't get stuck in between enemies. Maybe give them phasing, or at least make it so you can itemize into them. Minions are just trash right now. And that doesn't just go for Necro's minions. I think Necro's minions are probably even further removed from being playable than maybe Druid, but both have a huge problem. These need a lot more support, right? Wolves, Poison Creeper, Ravens, right? And if you're leveling right now as a Necro or Druid, you maybe have a different opinion, but just wait until you're like level 70 plus. You're going to get a bit of a reality check. Minions need more scaling options, and I understand that this is not just a minion issue, it's also, for example, Sorcerer, right, with Hydra. It's very clear that they want an active playstyle, not a passive one, but you can get around that by, for example, what they do with Druid. Druid already has an active button where you basically have to press certain things. I think overall, class-wide, the only solution would be to kind of play your character as an aura bot while you're playing minions. So for example, if you still want to have an active playstyle while giving people the options to play with minions, make it so that we are kind of like the buff bot, right, for minions. So let's say we have our 3 different minion skills here, and then we have 3 buffs, right? If you want minions to do damage, we still have to do actively buff them here or there with certain duration skills. You can then make that into its own itemization aspect, stuff like that. But right now, it's basically, do you play minions and just do nothing and maybe cast a pool here or there? Or do you play an active playstyle? There has to be something in the middle to actually make minions viable. Now, I have more points here, but honestly, it's not even season 1 yet, so I'm sure they're going to fix a lot of the stuff. Even though they didn't mention any of this in the dev interview, maybe they will down the line. So maybe we're going to have this video again in like half a year or something. We'll see what changed. Overall, these were the biggest issues I'd had. You can post in the comments. I'm sure I forgot some really major things. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.